All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books welcomes award-winning British author and reporter Damien Lewis, who will discuss the fascinating and riveting Agent Josephine, American beauty, French hero, British spy. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Damien Lewis, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers in-store shopping, curbside pickup, and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. We are happy to be able to bring our event series virtual. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. It also allows us to do this event as Damien is joining us from the UK. So we hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing a copy for you or for your friends on our website, left-bank.com. And I will share a direct link as well. Purchasing a copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating, so thank you so much for your support. I will also say, I don't know if you can see this really well, but we did get this beautiful wooden bookmark in that has a beautiful etching of Josephine Baker. That is not available on our website, but you can call us and add it to your order. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the event coordinator for Left Bank Books. We produce hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event, so please type your questions as a comment. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. We do have a lot of in-store, in-person events planned for this summer, but we will continue to offer virtual events and hybrid events into the virtual world. So be sure to check out our event calendar for all of our upcoming events. I do also want to say that Siren of the Tropics is going to be showing at the Webster University Film Series on August 6th as part of the Robert Classic French Film Festival. The 1927 French silent film Siren of the Tropics features Josephine Baker in her first starring role, wherein she plays a native girl who goes to Paris for love. Local favorites The Rats and People Motion Picture Orchestra will perform an original score live alongside the screening, and video artist Pierre Martin will introduce and host a post-film discussion. For more information and to purchase advance tickets for that, you can visit cinemastlouis.org. And now, about tonight's book, Agent Josephine, American beauty, French hero, British spy. Singer, actress, beauty, spy. During World War II, Josephine Baker, the world's richest and most glamorous entertainer, was an Allied spy in occupied France. This is the story of her heroic personal resistance to Nazi Germany. Prior to World War II, Josephine Baker was a music hall diva, renowned for her singing and dancing, her beauty and sexuality. She was the most highly paid female performer in Europe. When the Nazis seized her adopted city, Paris, she was banned from the stage, along with all negroes and Jews. Yet, instead of returning to America, she vowed to stay and to fight the Nazi evil. Overnight, she went from performer to resistance spy. In Agent Josephine, best-selling author Damien Lewis uncovers this little-known history of the famous singer's life. During the years of the war, as a member of the French nurse paratroopers, a cover for her spying work, she participated in numerous clandestine activities and emerged as a formidable spy. In turn, she was a hero of the three countries in whose name she served: the US, the nation of her birth; France, the land that embraced her during her adult career; and Britain, the country from whom she took her orders. As one of London's most closely guarded secret agents, Baker's Secret War embodies a tale of unbounded courage, passion, devotion, and sacrifice, and of deep and bitter tragedy, fueled by her own desire to combat the rise of Nazism and to fight for all that is good and right in the world. Drawing on a plethora of new historical material and rigorous research, including previously undisclosed letters and journals. Lewis upends the conventional journey of Josephine Baker, the story of Josephine Baker, revealing that her mark on history went far beyond the confines of the stage. And Scott Linga, the author of The Watchmakers, who also has a St. Louis connection, says, astonishing, exhilarating. Agent Josephine captures the indomitable spirit of Agent Josephine. Gripping as a thriller and superbly written. Everyone should read it. And now about our speaker. Damien Lewis is an award-winning writer who spent 20 years reporting from war, disaster, and conflict zones for the BBC and other global news organizations. He is the best-selling author of more than 20 books, many of which are being adapted into films or television series, including military history, thrillers, and several acclaimed memoirs about military working dogs. Lewis lives in Dorchester, England. And now, without further ado, I am so happy and pleased and proud to welcome our guest for the evening, Damien Lewis. Hello.
Hello. Thank you very much. That was fabulous.
Thank you.
And it's really a great privilege to be speaking here from the UK, but to Left Bank Books in St. Louis, as you pronounce it over there. I was under the impression it was St. Louis for a long time, but I've recently been corrected. So yeah, fabulous to be here talking to you guys. And I guess our story opens just prior to the war with a bulletproof Rolls-Royce nosing through the streets of Paris at night, and there's a chauffeur at the wheel, and in the rear seat is the Secret Intelligence Service. That's the British equivalent of the Central Intelligence Agency. There is the Secret Intelligence Service spy master in Paris, an individual called Wilfred Biffy Dunderdale. Biffy was his nickname. Who was actually one of the Ian Fleming's role models for James Bond. They knew each other well during and after the war. And Dunderdale is carrying on his person a dossier of evidence about the foremost French spy prior to the outbreak of the war. He's intercepted material that this French traitor is sending to the German intelligence service, the Abwehr, and it is explosive and highly damaging to Allied interests. And it mainly concerns the activities and the wherewithal of the French naval fleet, which at that stage was the fourth most powerful in the world. And Dunderdale takes this material to the headquarters in Paris of the Deuxième Bureau. And the Deuxième Bureau was the French counter-espionage service, so a key part of the French intelligence apparatus. And at this time, just prior to the war, crucial to understand that the British Secret Intelligence Service and the French Secret Intelligence Services were working hand in glove very, very closely to try to counter the rising threat of Nazism and the drums of war beating from Berlin. So Dunderdale arrives at the Deuxième Bureau headquarters, and he meets there Colonel Paul Pelol, who is the Deuxième Bureau chief of the German desk, and his deputy, a chap called Captain Jacques Abte, who's another long-standing agent. And he hands over this dossier of evidence in the hope and the intention that they can catch this standout traitor. The problem is that he is only signing off on his intelligence dossiers that he's sending to the enemy with one letter, which is the letter A. So they have no clue as to his real identity, apart from the fact that perhaps one of his names begins with A. And then, in due course, in a matter of weeks, the traitor sends an alert to the German intelligence agencies, letting them know that he's going to be traveling to Antwerp, the capital of Belgium, to deliver 2 suitcase loads of top secret documentation to the German intelligence service on the French naval fleet. And because they know the date that he's traveling to Antwerp, Colonel Pelol gets hold of, via his contacts, all the hotel registration cards for that weekend, and painstakingly they go through all those registration cards for Antwerp for that weekend, and they stumble upon the fact that a Captain Aubert, only Aubert, so a surname beginning with A, has registered in an Antwerp hotel that weekend, and they believe they have their suspect. And they find out that he's serving on a French warship. And so they go and raid the warship, and they go and they break into Aubut's cabin, and they catch him in the middle, literally in the process of copying down the French naval codes, the top secret French naval codes, to hand over to the German intelligence service, which was some of it had already been sent, absolutely war-winning intelligence. And Ober is forced to confess, and it turns out he's been carrying out this espionage and been the foremost French traitor on behalf of his lover, so that he can set up a love nest for the two of them. What does the French intelligence service and Dunderdale realise as a result of this episode? Well, one thing is painfully clear. It's been growing clearer in the months running up to the war, and it's this: the Abwehr, the German intelligence service, has a practically unlimited budget. It's being funded massively from Berlin, and it's flooding France in particular with German spies. By contrast, the French intelligence service and the British intelligence service are woefully underfunded. They're painfully lacking in agents, and they're getting very little support from a French government and British government, which are refusing to recognize or accept that after the First World War, which was not that long ago, and millions died in that war, that there might possibly be another war with the old enemy, Germany. And so the French intelligence service decide that the only way they can increase their ability to gather intelligence and to counter the threat of the German intelligence services is to put out requests for what are basically voluntary freelance spies. They can't afford to pay any professional agents, and so they have to put out these requests for what were termed honourable correspondence. And there's a long-standing tradition of honourable correspondence serving in both the French intelligence service and other intelligence services around the world. Who are these individuals? Well, they're the kind of people who, because of their work or their family background, have natural affinity towards espionage. So, for example, very good honourable correspondents are journalists and writers, because we travel all over the world, we take notes, we ask questions. It's a very good cover for being a spy. Industrialists, anyone who has the ability to travel and work at that kind of level would be a good candidate for an honourable correspondent. But so too were showbiz personalities, because they, of course, had the ability to go and perform all over the world and pass through borders, because that was what being a touring showbiz personality involved. And so because of this, shortly before the outbreak of the war, the suggestion is made within the Deuxième Bureau that Josephine Baker, the American-born but now French national, the world's foremost female star of stage screen at the time, the most photographed woman in the world, should be recruited as a honourable correspondent, as a spy for the Deuxième Bureau. Now, there is great resistance to doing this on a number of levels. First of all, because the world of espionage at that time was very chauvinistic. There was a view that women did not make good agents. That was just the prejudice of the time. The second reason why there's great resistance is because those people who consider recruiting Josephine fear that she will be like one of those classic showbiz personalities who will shatter like glass at the first sign of any danger. And so there is great resistance to recruiting her. But Colonel Paylol in particular insists that an approach should be made to Josephine. And so Jacques Abte, his deputy, Captain Jacques Abte, is persuaded to drive out to Josephine's chateau on the outskirts of Paris to at least make an approach, which he does. So Jacques Abte travels out there, and he's imagining in his mind, he can envisage turning up and meeting the classic Josephine that everybody, the stereotype that everybody knew of the time, which was Josephine in a fantastic ball gown, glittering in jewelry, probably with her pet cheetah Chiquita on its diamond-studded leash. Very much the showwoman of popular image. And he turns up at the Le Beau Chêne, her chateau in Paris, drives through the gate, And as they're pulling to a halt, there's this cry from the bushes of hello. And he looks over and he sees a figure emerge from the grounds of the chateau, dressed in a battered felt cap and old gardening clothes. And it is Josephine Baker. And this is not the image he's expecting at all. And she welcomes him into the chateau. They sit down at the fireplace, and her white-coated butler serves them both champagne. And then, of course, how do you recruit an honorary correspondent? Well, you can hardly just come out and say it, I'm here to recruit you as a spy. It doesn't work that way. You have to try to somehow informally sound that person out. And that's exactly what transpires. They sit in front of the fireplace and they chat. And very quickly, Abte realizes something. He realizes that he's being treated to just a tiny slice of that incredible magnetic personality and charm and the ability of Josephine as a performer to reach out from the stage and to touch personally every person in her audience. This was something very special she had as a performer, something unique. It was the ability to make every man or woman in the audience feel as if she was singing and dancing solely for him or for her. Jean-Pierre Reggiori, who was one of Josephine's dance partners, who's still alive, lives in New York, a lovely individual, has been very helpful with me writing the book. And he explained to me, he described to me this absolutely unique power that she had to reach out and touch her audience. And Jacques Abte, as he sits talking with her in Le Beau Chêne, starts to experience that. He's treated to an up-close, personal experience of Josephine Baker's power as a performer on the stage. And he thinks to himself, he realizes, if she can harness this quality to touch and to reach out and to involve someone emotionally in her persona, if she could harness that to the requirements of espionage, of spying, she would be unstoppable, potentially a world-beating spy. And so eventually he poses the question, obviously I'm here on official business at the end of the day, and we want to know at the Design Bureau, would you be amenable to signing up to be an honorable correspondent? And Josephine says to Jacques Abte, words to the effect, France has made me everything that I am today, and I am willing to give my adopted country my life. And so she basically volunteers herself as a freelance spy. And Jacques Abte said, well, you are now one of the Brotherhood, you're now one of us. And he says, I will be giving you shortly your first mission. What did Josephine mean by that? By saying, France has given me everything and I'll give this country my life? Well, she was born and brought up in St. Louis, as I'm sure most of your audience know, and had an impoverished upbringing, stealing coal from trains, going barefoot to school, left school at a very early age, ran away to make her way to find fame and fortune on the stage, and eventually made her way to Broadway and won herself a place in a Broadway act. But she very quickly realized by her late teens that in America, because of segregation, because of the Jim Crow laws, she was never, she feared, going to be able to make it as she hoped that she would. And so when she was age 19, she was invited by an impresario, a theatre manager, to go to Paris to star in a new show that they were planning to put on there called the Revue Negre. And although she was daunted by the idea of leaving America, she'd never left her country before, stepping out into the unknown, as this would entail, she took her heart in her hands. She sailed to France and arrived in Paris. And she was the star female performer in the Revue Negre. And very quickly, within a matter of months, she'd taken Paris and then France and then all of Europe by storm. She toured the continent and was welcomed and huge enthusiasm for the Revue Negre and then further shows. And so by her early 20s, she has achieved this dream of becoming this global superstar because of the break she was given in France. And that's what she meant by France has given me everything. It was the first country in which she felt she could be free. And so she would be willing to give France her life now that the threat of Nazi Germany was becoming so real. And so that first espionage mission that Abte gives her, she Josephine, during her tours of Europe, had been to Italy and toured Italy. And while she was there, she'd become taken with Mussolini, the fascist dictator. And she had, because of that, she was well received at the very highest levels of Italian society, and she had fantastic ins with the Italian embassy in Paris. And what the Allies were desperate to know, what London and Washington and Paris were desperate to know, was what would the Italians do should there be an outbreak of war? Would they side with Nazi Germany? Would they become part of the Axis? Would they remain neutral? Or would they take a different path? Nobody knew. And Josephine was asked to try to find out what the Italian intentions were. So, and within a week, she phoned up Jacques Abte and demanded that they meet. And they met in central Paris with Josephine driving her luxury Delage motor car and in a state of great excitement, almost beside herself with excitement. She explains to Jacques Abte exactly what the Italians' intentions are. And what's happened is she's been to the Italian embassy. She has seduced intellectually, maybe physically, the attaché, the military attaché at the Italian embassy, and found out exactly what the Italians' intentions were, which was, of course, that they had already cut a deal with Berlin that they would join Nazi Germany once war was declared. And so Jacques Abte realizes two things. One, she can deliver. She can absolutely deliver on that promise that he felt that she might have. But on the other hand, he realizes that because of her state of excitement, she's very overexcited. She's so overexcited, in fact, that she's driving erratically, and the French police stop them, and they're about to arrest her. And then, of course, they realize it's Josephine Baker, and she treats them to that fantastic smile, and they let her off. But Jacques Abte's worried that he will be able to handle, to be the handler, to harness this new intelligence recruit to the Allied cause. Very quickly, that concern, that fear starts to dissipate, and it really comes to a head in the mission that Josephine undertakes just after the outbreak of the war, the end of the phony war, and the fall of France. Now, the British and French intelligence services knew France would not stand against the Nazi onslaught. They were convinced of that. They'd warned London and Paris, if Germany invades, France cannot stand. But nobody for one moment envisaged that France would fall within 4 weeks of Nazi Germany, of the forces of Nazi Germany crossing the border. The collapse of France was so precipitate, no one had seen it coming. Within 4 weeks, Germany had managed to achieve what it tried to do for 4 years in the First World War, to take Paris, which it had failed to do back then. So it's unprecedented. No one's seen this happening. Why is that important? It's important because when Paris eventually falls in June 1940, the French intelligence services are so woefully ill prepared for that outcome. They thought they had reserve plans in place. They had fallback options. They could retreat with their precious files of their agents and their intelligence to fallback headquarters outside of Paris, to the south, in other parts of France. But in fact, the fall of France has been so swift and so catastrophic that everything is in disarray. Now, at that moment, the moment that France falls, that Paris is taken by Nazi Germany and all seems lost, Josephine could have done what the vast majority of Americans did in France at that time, because bear in mind, America was a neutral country. So American citizens were citizens of a neutral nation. So they had every right to leave France, to return to the USA, their home country, and to flee to safety. And of course, at the American embassy in Paris, there were queues of Americans awaiting their passports being stamped, their visas to travel back to the USA. And indeed, why should they not? But Josephine chose otherwise. And this is one thing that struck me about her story from the very get-go, from the very outset. She was unbreakable and unyielding in her commitment to fight for what was right, to fight against the threat of Nazism. And while she could have taken the easy road, she could have fled back to the USA. In fact, she would have been at the front of the queue for the right papers and the right stamps and a passport at the American embassy in Paris, because she was Josephine Baker. And of course, she would have been given priority treatment. But instead, she did nothing of the sort. She left Paris with some Jewish refugees and some disaffected French intelligence and military officers, and she travelled south to her home in the country, in the Dordogne, so to the south of Paris, and to the Chateau des Milandes, which was this 14th century chateau that she had rented at some stage before the war, with no intention of it ever becoming her resistance or espionage headquarters. But by serendipity, it is actually the perfect place to retreat to with her crew of would-be makeshift resistors. Now, bear in mind that at this time, June, July, August 1940, in France, no one has the slightest clue how to resist. No one has a plan. No one has any weapons. No one knows how to fight. No one even knows what form that fight might take. No one even knows if anyone in France will fight and resist. Because, of course, the armistice has been signed with Nazi Germany. France has been divided into two. There's occupied France in the north, occupied by the Germans. There's the Vichy half in the south, which is supposedly independent, but allied now with Nazi Germany, the former enemy. No one even knows if resistance is going to be possible. But Josephine is determined to resist. And one of the questions that I kind of asked myself in researching the book was, why was she so adamant that she would fight? And if you think about it, she'd fled America, she'd fled the USA because she didn't feel she could be free there. She couldn't be herself. She couldn't achieve what she knew she had within her talents. And she'd found freedom and opportunity and respect in France and in Europe. And now, because of the invasion of Nazi Germany, because of the hatred and vitriol and bile emanating from the core of Nazism, all of that was under threat. And even before the outbreak of the war, Josephine herself had been identified as an enemy of the Nazi state, as somebody who should be, reviled by any right-thinking Nazi. And so she was determined to fight for freedom. And so as she gathers her resistors in her chateau in the summer of 1940, they hear this speech by Charles de Gaulle, now the leader of the Free French in exile in London, followed up shortly by Winston Churchill's speech, exhorting the French people to rise up and fight, to carry on the resistance. Very few heard those calls. Very few people responded in any way, shape, or form, but Josephine was determined to do so. And she gets the first real opportunity when Jacques Abté, her former handler from the 2e Bureau, Captain Jacques Abté, turns up in July 1940 at the chateau gates with news and with documentation and a plan. And basically, Abté has come to Josephine, at the behest of Colonel Pelol, his boss, and also Dunderdale, the Secret Intelligence Service spy master from London. And her mission, which had been premeditated before the outbreak of the war, it had been discussed and planned, but no one foresaw the speed of the collapse of France. But her mission is absolutely groundbreaking. It's war-winning stuff. So it's extraordinary to think of it. But after the fall of France, the Secret Intelligence Service London, and bear in mind London, Great Britain was really the only dog in the fight right then in the summer of 1940. London had been completely blinded. They did not have one single spy or source or radio station remaining in France. There was no intelligence coming out of the French nation. Why was that crucial? Because Germany was about to mount the invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion, the Battle of Britain, and the Blitz from French shores. And so it's absolutely vital that London, that Britain started to get intelligence flowing again from France. And while the French intelligence service had officially ceased to exist and become an adjunct almost of the Nazi state because of the armistice with Nazi Germany, secretly, underground, those French intelligence operatives who were determined to continue the fight were now gathering intelligence in an underground manner. Colonel Paul Pelol, first and foremost amongst them. And so they had gathered a huge body of absolutely vital intelligence that they had to get to London. They had no means to do so. That became Josephine's task. Why was Josephine chosen? Because she had the perfect alibi to travel just about anywhere where she had the opportunity to perform. Because there was a war didn't mean that showbiz stopped. People still needed to be entertained. And the plan was put together that Josephine would mount a bona fide tour. So she would put on shows in Lisbon, the capital of neutral Portugal, because Lisbon just happened to have, in the British Embassy in Lisbon, a cell of the Secret Intelligence Service. So she would put on shows there, which would give her the excuse to travel to Lisbon with all the cover you could imagine, hiding in plain sight as the superstar Josephine Baker. And when Josephine goes on tour, she has to tour with all of her tour trunks, full of her costumes, her musical score sheets, and all the accoutrements you need for a theatrical tour. And in those tour trunks would be hidden all the intelligence that had been gathered by the underground French intelligence service since the fall of France until now. And we're talking September, October 1940, before Josephine and Jacques Abte set off on this mission. Some of that material would be transcribed in secret ink by Jacques Abte, who knew how to do, obviously he knew his tradecraft, his spycraft, on her musical score sheets. But some of it, because it could not be carried in any other way. So, for example, photographs of the invasion craft the Germans were building to invade Britain, that had to be carried as raw intelligence, raw photographs, raw documentation, and it would simply be hidden in her tour luggage. What did that mean? That meant that if she was stopped and searched by the Gestapo or the customs at any of those many borders she had to cross, she would obviously very quickly be unmasked. And you know, we've got to be clear about something. What would Josephine being unmasked have entailed? Well, death would have been a nicety. There were far worse things than death that the Gestapo and the SS visited on those who were the enemies of the Nazi state. And so the risks that Josephine were taking were absolutely legion. And this was just the first of numerous clandestine intelligence operations she undertook. And to give you an indication of how principled she was on this first operation, Jacques Auté, her Deuxième Bureau handler, now had a false passport and a false identity and was posing as her tour manager. So as a former ballet master from Marseille, the French city, that was his cover. He was the tour manager traveling with Josephine to oversee her tour to Lisbon. And she insisted that he had stamped in his passport accompanying Josephine Baker on her tour, because with that, it gave him extra cover if he was stopped himself. But it also meant that if he was stopped and unmasked and exposed, and there was far greater chance of him being exposed than her, because he had a much longer and higher profile as an intelligence agent, then she would also be unmasked by association. So in October 1940, they set off on that mission. And it's an absolutely high wire act. And the standout thing about this incredible operation they undertake, and what really kind of struck me from the very get-go, I could not conceive of how Josephine Baker, the world's most photographed woman prior to the war, true global superstar, could have been an agent of the shadows, a spy. Because how can you be a spy when you're so high profile? It just seemed to me to be completely counterintuitive. Well, actually, that was Josephine's great secret. Her great quality was that she was hiding in plain sight. She was doing no more than being Josephine Baker to cover up what she was really up to, which was her espionage work. And so in each of those border crossings, in each of those checkpoints, in each of those customs posts, Josephine breezes through in her furs and her jewelry and with her superstar quality, so that at every single point, nobody for one moment ever thinks to stop her, to suspect her, to check her, to question her. They are starstruck, as you know, individuals tend to be today when they come across superstars. And so she, with Abte, manages to get all of that material through to Lisbon, whereupon Abte himself delivers 40 files worth of top secret intelligence to the British embassy and into the hands of the British Secret Service cell there, where it's flown directly to London and delivered into the hands of Wilfred Biffy Dunderdale, the individual who I opened the talk with. And Dunderdale messages back to Josephine and Jacques Abte saying he is delighted, over the moon with the intelligence they've delivered. But Here's the rub. Josephine and Jacques Abte intended, their plan was to fly to London themselves, to meet with Charles de Gaulle, the leader of the Free French, to be formally signed up as agents of Free France, and then to return to their spying work in due course. And Dunderdale asks them not to do so. In fact, he doesn't really ask them, he tells them not to do so. And he says it's far more important that you return to France and you formalize this intelligence pipeline that you've reopened, i.e., Colonel Paul Pelol and all the other underground French intelligence agents inside France are gathering more material. We need it in London. You are the conduit. We need you to get that pipeline really flowing. That's the excuse Dunderdale uses to ask them to return to France immediately, not to come to London. The real reason he doesn't want them in London is because he knows there's conflict already developing between the Free French Intelligence Service and the Secret Intelligence Service. There's a turf war over agents, and he's worried that Josephine and Jack might fall victim to that. And so, almost immediately, Josephine volunteers to return to France, and she does so solo on her own. It's her first solo intelligence operation. She flies back into France. She goes to Marseille, the city in the south of France, the port city on the Mediterranean coast, where she knows Colonel Paul Pelol has now set up his shadow intelligence gathering service. And when she arrives there, Pelol is overjoyed, obviously, that she's achieved her mission, this groundbreaking war-winning mission, and that she's now back to cement the intelligence flow between the secret French intelligence service and London. But at the same time, he says something to her which surprises her. And he says, Josephine, now you're back in France, you must perform. You must go on the stage and perform. Josephine has vowed, after the fall of France, she's vowed she would never again perform in France when there was still a Nazi remaining in that country. This was her principle. And bear in mind, very few showbiz personalities took that kind of principle stand. But Josephine was adamant that she would not perform whilst there was still a Nazi in France. And Pelol says you cannot do that. And you cannot do that for these reasons. First of all, your performing is your cover. If you don't perform, your cover is blown. We need you to perform to maintain your cover. And he said, secondly, you need the money. Because Josephine had also refused to be paid for any of her intelligence work. She said, I will fund my own intelligence activities throughout the war. And indeed, she did. For the rest of the war, all the intelligence activities she undertook, and all then in future, the morale-boosting performance she gave for the Allied troops, she did, funding it herself. And in fact, she pretty much exhausted her fortune that she built up before the war in funding these activities. And so Pelol convinces her to put on a show in Marseille, and they mount La Creole, the comic opera, and they perform it that winter of 1940-41. And it's performed to great success. However, in the early days of January 1941, Pelol comes to Josephine again and says, look, you have to cut the performances short. And the reason is that the Gestapo are now onto you, and you are on their hit list, and they are going to come for you, Josephine, and you have to flee. And so she has to travel at that stage to flee. And the place he suggests she goes to is North Africa, from where they will then orchestrate the intelligence flow to London. So from France to North Africa, Casablanca will be the hub, onwards from there to Lisbon to London, keeping the intelligence flowing. And so in early January 1941, Josephine Jacques Abte and her ad hoc resistance crew board a liner to sail to North Africa to re-establish themselves in Casablanca and escape the clutches of the Gestapo. And Josephine is adamant about one thing as she's leaving France. She sends one of her ad hoc resistors to Chateau de Milon, her home in the country, to collect all of her animals. So this exotic menagerie of animals that she had accompany her on the stage throughout her show business career. So it's her Great Dane, her monkeys, her snakes, all those animals that gave her such an exotic show persona. She does so for two reasons. She's always had this incredible connection with animals ever since she was a young child, and would do for the rest of her life. But the other reason she wants those animals now is because they are themselves a fantastic part of her cover. Who would ever imagine a secret intelligence agent traveling cross borders, cruising across the Mediterranean with a crazy exotic menagerie of animals like that in tow? It was part of her cover, part of her hiding in plain sight. And as she said, Josephine should never tour without her animals because they are my perfect cover. And so together they sail for Casablanca, and that's where Josephine and Jack re-establish themselves as their intelligence cell, and to keep the flow of intelligence flowing to London. It very quickly, Josephine now becomes almost the teacher to the pupil. So Jacques Capet is no longer her spy master. The reason being, he finds himself unable to travel because he doesn't have her profile and her reason to go and cross borders and travel to Europe. He is actually stuck most of the time now in North Africa, in Casablanca, whereas Josephine can travel whenever and wherever she wishes, as long as she has the cover of her performances. And so very quickly, she becomes this solo standout intelligence agent who takes over the role from him. And this isn't just acting as a courier for intelligence that's already been gathered by the secret French intelligence service in France. She's now departing on solo intelligence operations of her own, gathering key intelligence for the Allies. And in due course, in a matter of months, when Roosevelt, the US president, sends his 12 apostles, his diplomats, but really his spies, to North Africa to prepare for the Allied landings in North Africa, the first major amphibious operation of the war by the Allies. When Roosevelt sends his 12 apostles to North Africa, Casablanca being their key base, they realize very, very quickly that in terms of gathering intelligence for the Operation Torch landings, on enemy dispositions, or on the beaches they might land at, on the ports, on the air bases, all these things you need to launch such a highly risky operation. They realize very quickly that the key source of intelligence, or one of the key sources of intelligence that they can tap into, is Josephine Baker and Jacques Capet's network. And so by mid-1941, late 1941, Josephine and Jacques have become not just agents of France and of Britain, of course, but also now agents of America, because their intelligence is being provided to the 12 apostles, who then send it largely in a diplomatic pouch, so via diplomatic courier service from North Africa to London, and from there it's copied to Washington. So she is now also serving as a standout spy in America's cause. And just to give you an indication of how incredibly successful that intelligence gathering was on behalf of America, when the 12 apostles are recalled to the States shortly before the Torch landings, some of them were called back for obvious reasons. One of them, Josephine's key handler, goes to meet her and says to her words to the effect that America will never forget what you have done for her. That was how groundbreaking that intelligence was for the Americans as well as the rest of the Allies. And so I'm aware of the fact that we're running up to our time now when it should be open for Q&As. But just to finish off as quickly as I can the story. So Josephine continues her spying work, but also becomes a standout performer for the Allied troops for the rest of the war. And she's such a standout freelance intelligence agent and spy, but also performer for Allied troops, that at the end of the war, she's decorated by the French with a number of high valor medals. And recently, of course, she's just been elevated to the Pantheon in Paris, in France, which is the highest accolade that can be ever paid to a hero of the French nation. It's been fantastic talking about her story, especially to an audience based out of St. Louis, which of course was Josephine's hometown. And I'm really happy to take any questions that you may have and talk to you more about her amazing story.
Wow. First off, Damien, thank you so much for sharing the story. It was fascinating to sit here and listen to you speak. Incredible to hear the story, a story that I was not familiar with that I am so thankful that you are sharing with us. I want to remind everyone watching that we do have copies of this phenomenal book, Agent Josephine, available for sale at Left Bank Books, and we can ship anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world even. So we did have someone question if we would be at the We Have Ways event next week. We will not be traveling to the UK to be doing an event. So unfortunately, Damien, is there going to be a bookseller there that you'll be signing books in the UK?
I know the We Have Ways event very well. It's a really good event. I'm sadly not going to be there. I was at the Chalk Valley History Festival just a few weeks back. So and there's crossover between the two. So but that was a fantastic event. I'm sure Waterstones will be at the We Have Ways event, and they will, I'm sure, have the books on sale. So
Fantastic. I want to remind the audience watching, of which there are very many of you, so thank you all so much for joining us, that if you have questions, we do still have quite a bit of time. And let's start with a comment from Pam, and then we do have a question from Ray. Pam says, this sounds like a good pairing with the book I'm currently reading about Virginia Hall, an American spy who deployed behind enemy lines to help the French resistance.
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. I mean, Virginia was, it's a very heroic story, and there are lots of crossovers and parallels, especially in the way that Virginia suffered at the hands of her adversaries. I mean, that really is a great story in terms of what these courageous women were risking. Very good point.
All right. Ray asks, was her work finished when France or Paris was free, or did it continue later?
So Josephine's espionage work after the liberation of Paris was pretty much over, but she kind of segued into being this standout performer for and not just American troops, all Allied troops. In fact, the Americans, after the Torch landings, the top American and British generals approached Josephine, and basically the American generals tried to get her to sign up to a exclusive contract to be a performer for American troops to the end of the war. And Josephine refused. It was a very lucrative contract, and she refused. And she refused because she said, I have to be free to perform for all troops, all Allied troops, regardless of their nationality, and I won't accept any pay. So she said, I will obviously perform for American troops, but I've got to be able to perform for the French, the British, the Czechs, the Poles, whatever nationality they may be. And so she carried on that standout role as a performer, on the front line, often under fire, lots of death-defying experiences in that period. But at the same time, especially in North Africa, so for months and months and months after the Torch landings, she was also carrying out this clandestine espionage role. And that really only came to an end, if it ever did, during the war, after the liberation of Paris, when she then joined the frontline troops as they marched on Germany and liberated Germany itself. And, to give you an indication of how she was there absolutely until the bitter end, after Victory in Europe Day was declared in May 1945, the Allies asked for a performer to go to Buchenwald, the concentration camp, to perform for the dying, the typhoid victims and the other inmates of the camp. And Josephine was the person who stepped forward. So she was there right until the final act in terms of the war in Germany and its aftermath.
Can you maybe shed some light on why you might think that Josephine Baker is underrepresented and underappreciated? I know that in France, she has been getting the recognition that she deserves recently, but why has it taken so long, and why were people maybe reluctant to give her such accolades that she deserves?
There was resistance even in France. So when Josephine was put forward for the Légion d'honneur, which is a high valor French decoration award, after the war, it was refused and turned down numerous times. She didn't get it until 1957, if my memory serves me well, and it was a real fight. And people did suggest this was prejudice against a woman, prejudice against a woman of color. So it took a long time for her to get that award. But I think there's another aspect of it too, which is perhaps less well known and less easy to understand, which is that there's a difference between being a resistance fighter and being an intelligence operative. So those people who were involved in the resistance in France, they were free to speak about it and write about it after the war. But those people who fought the War of the Shadows, so the intelligence operatives like Josephine, they were supposed to stay silent about their activities for decades after those activities taken place. In fact, most intelligence operatives, as you know, never speak about what they got up to whilst they were intelligence operatives, because that is what you are expected to do, to remain silent about your activities, and often until your grave. And most secret agents take their secrets to their graves with them. And so Josephine never really spoke about that side of her war during her life. She always maintained, and this is one thing that drew me to her story, she always maintained that she was most proud of the war years in terms of her achievements in her life. If ever she was asked by the media, what are you most proud of, Josephine? Right until her dying day, she'd always say the war years, but she never spoke in detail about what she'd really done during the war. And that culture and expectation of secrecy, that's endured to the present. I mean, bear in mind, one of the seminal moments in researching the book was and the French government need credit for this. They really do. The French government released some of those secret intelligence service files from the Second World War, which pertained to Josephine and Jacques Abtay's work, literally a matter of 18 months ago or so. So, that's a great thing to have done, and that makes the telling of the story far more viable. But as an example, the British Secret Intelligence Service never release any files. It isn't done. And so, you have these layers of secrecy which have to be unpicked before you can start telling the story and making it more well known.
John says, great talk, Damien. A brilliant book about a very brave woman. I urge everyone to buy a copy. And again, we have them for sale at Left Bank Books. And this, now that I can actually see myself, this really beautiful wooden bookmark from Flypaper Products, which is a natural wood bookmark. To realize our dreams, we must decide to wake up. A quote from Josephine Baker. So those are both available for sale at Left Bank Books. Kathy asks, the publicity for your book indicates that you have included new historical research. Were you surprised by any new information on Baker's work as a spy?
I was, by lots of things. I mean, one of the things that really, really surprised me and inspired me to write the story was that, and I touched upon it in my talk, but I expected the professional intelligence agents, Jacques Abtay, Colonel Paylol, Dunderdale, to have supported Josephine, to have supported and inspired her throughout the war. And actually, the standout part of her story is it's the other way around. At every stage, one of them, Abtay, Paylol, they all lose heart. They believe the war's lost. I mean, and it's understandable. I mean, summer 1940 through to even 1943, it looked as if everything was lost. The Allies had lost. Nazi Germany was triumphant. And so and all of them are very, very, very clear about this in their writings and what they said about the war years. At every stage, Josephine turns around to them and says, no, we will win. Have no doubt we will win. And she says, America will enter the war. I know America will enter the war. And you have no idea what the Americans are capable of. Once America enters the war, this war is won. And she never, ever faltered. And people have asked me, because she really, really exhausted herself. And worse than that, she ruined her health during the Second World War. Absolutely ruined her health. I write about it in the book. She's battling death on so many times, and it's because of the cumulative exhaustion of back-to-back espionage mission, the tension, the stress. It's just unbelievable. And a lot of people have asked me, well, why did she why after 2 years didn't she say, well, I've done enough, I'm now going to go back to America to recuperate? Or after 3 years? No, she lasts from before the outbreak of the war right through to after VE Day, and never once falters or gives up. And so that standout, unbreakable quality that she had, really, really surprised me and shone through. That was just one of the many revelations which I found jaw dropping. This was one remarkable lady. I know. I mean, she had been schooled on the tough streets of St. Louis. She'd had a tough upbringing. She was a fighter. Let's make no bones about that. She was a fighter from birth. But that kind of inner strength is really remarkable, and it shines through.
Before we get to this other question, I did want to ask if you were able to share any of the exciting news about the adaptation of the book.
Yes, so there should be a streaming TV series made on Josephine's wartime story, and it's we hope it should be happening. Deals are in the offing, and there's a very, very well. I mean, Janelle Monáe, the fantastic, wonderful singer and star, is scheduled to play Josephine. So we're really hopeful. It will concentrate simply on the war years. There's been this real meeting of minds in terms of this desire to tell this standout part of her story, and it's as I say, it's the part of her life. This was the watershed moment. It's the moment Josephine went from being a kind of showbiz superstar, and then the war transformed her. She comes out the other end to being a showbiz superstar, but a serious player, an activist for civil liberties and rights, around the world. It's the war that changes her, and she's quite open about that herself. And so to tell that story, that wartime developing character, transformational story, that's hugely exciting. Really, very, very exciting.
I love Janelle Monáe. All right. We definitely have. So Ray is asking, can you speak a bit about the children Josephine adopted? Did that come up in your research?
Yeah, of course. So I mentioned the fact that Josephine ruined her health during the war because of the cumulative impact of all of the espionage, and so she found out in 1943 that she was unable to conceive, and she'd always dreamed of being a mother. It was a real blow to her, but it didn't. She didn't abandon her mission in any way, shape, or form. But it was terrible news, and so that was why at the end of the war, when she married Joe Bouillon, who was the conductor of her orchestra right at the end of the war, her performing orchestra. That's why they adopted the children that they did, because she could not conceive and she'd always dreamed of having a family, and that was her only way. And it's kind of one of the tragedies of the wartime story. But again, it's not as if she looked back on it and said the war ruined my chances to be a mother. She wasn't like that. She made a virtue out of necessity. She couldn't have her own children, so she adopted her own tribe. And, again, that was her spirit through and through. It was her spirit through the war, being unbreakable. It carried through to her family and her motherhood. It's poignant, but it's something that she saw as being the cost of winning the war, I guess.
I want to again remind the local audience in St. Louis that the film Siren of the Tropics will be playing on August 6th at the Webster University Film Series, and you can purchase tickets at cinemastlouis.org. And I want to thank you so much, Damien, for writing this book, for putting in all the research, doing the incredible work of taking the story and giving it to us. So I was saying before the event that frequently in my 11 years of being a bookseller, I have had people ask, like how they can find out more about Josephine Baker in book form. And really, there are few options and few good options. And this is really just such a treasure. And I'm so excited to get this into more people's hands. So thank you. And I want to thank the audience watching. I hope that you enjoyed this chat as much as I did. This is really phenomenal. You can share, tell your friends to watch this, and be sure to look at our event series to find out about more of our upcoming events. We have some really incredible events, including another UK author, Ruth Ware, joining us next week. So I am thrilled. And Damien, I just really cannot thank you enough for
thank you.
Stunning chat tonight.
My privilege. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, everyone watching, have a great rest of your evening. And Damien, I hope you enjoy sleep, because it is getting very late there. So
it's 1 o'clock in the morning here, guys.
All right. Thank you all, everyone.
Cheers.